Can you just describe for everyone, I mean, what would a day in a life of Bob Rathbun be like preparing for, so leading up to your first SEC game, you know, what are the steps?
Well, I always tell folks there's really two kinds of preparation. There's one that is game specific. There's one that we're doing for Jackson State and Mississippi State. But there's another type that goes on all year long. And that preparation is, you see a newspaper article, magazine article, interview on TV, you just file it away for when you need it later in the season.
Right.
So that's sort of ongoing. But game specific, someone asked me just the other day, how many hours do you put into getting ready for a football game? And football is the most demanding, or at least it is for me, because there's so many players and you get 2 new teams every week. You can't hold over a club from week to week. And so I sat down and I added up coaches meeting, videotape, how long it takes to go through all the printed material, talking to the producer, talking to Tim Couch. You know, when you add it all up, and it takes about 30 hours of total preparation time, minimum, each week to get ready for when we hit the air at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on September 1st.
Right. But do you remember the first game that you ever covered, or just maybe not necessarily the specifics, but I mean, I remember the first play-by-play I ever did. It was exhilarating, but I also knew how bad I was. I mean, what was it like for you?
Well, I made my debut when I was 12 years old.
12?
12. Okay. And I got to do a half an inning of an American Legion baseball game.
How did that come about?
I was a kid that grew up in Salisbury, North Carolina, and I loved radio, and I loved sports. And one day, just out of the clear blue, I picked up the telephone and I called the radio station. And the announcer on duty, I mean, this is a little, you know, tiny radio station in Salisbury, WSTP. And the announcer on duty, a gentleman named John Bolser, picks up the telephone. He says, well, if you're that interested, come on down, I'll give you a tour of the radio station.
There you go.
So he did. My mom and dad took me down. I got a tour, and that turned into an every Sunday ritual where I'd go down and hang out at the radio station. Well, one day the sports guy shows up. And he says, well, if you love sports and you love radio, come help us broadcast these American Legion baseball games. And they were broadcast because the team was so good. They were state champs, and they were packing 3,000 to 4,000 people in this tiny little ballpark in Salisbury, Newman Park. So I did what a 12-year-old kid would do. I get the guy a Coke, and I kept score, and, you know, just did chores, really. So one day he says to me, and I'll tell you his name at the end, he says, you ready to make your debut? I said, yeah, I am. So I got the mic in the bottom of the 7th inning, 12 years old, and they're playing in what we would call today a Class A ballpark. But this high school kids in the summertime, American Legion ball, 16, 17 years old. So for them to hit one out was a pretty big deal. We hadn't hit one. They won the state championship, hit 3 home runs all year. I get the mic, our first baseman, Joey Brown, I'll never forget it, as long as I live, gets in the box, turns on one, boom, and it's gone. Over the fence, scoreboard, Coca-Cola sign, goodbye, home run. And I got to call it. I have no idea what I said. But the announcer gets the mic back in the top of the 8th inning. And he says, ladies and gentlemen, I have been waiting all season to call a home run. And when we hit one, I got some 12-year-old kid on the mic, and that was Marty Brenneman, who was just starting his career, the Hall of Fame announcer with the Cincinnati Reds.
And the seed was planted. So moving forward now to this season, let's talk specifically about the SEC. In your first game, Mississippi State, and then you have Ole Miss. In general, where do you see those teams fitting in? It seems like it's a challenge sort of year for Dan Mullen, and then Hugh Freeze, obviously his first year, but he's got a heck of a schedule.
Yes, he does.
Plate for his first year. But what do you think is going to happen in the Mississippi region?
Yeah, well, I think for Mississippi State, this is a huge season. And week 2 is the one that they've got circled. That's the Auburn game. Dan Mullen, since he's been the head coach, hasn't beaten an SEC West team other than Ole Miss. He's 3-15, and he's a little sick and tired of hearing about that. So they've got that Auburn game circled. They've got it at home. And that's really a 2-game swing for them. You know, if they win, they're really 2 games up on Auburn.
Right.
If they lose, they're 2 back because you obviously own the tiebreaker. So that is a huge swing game right away. And it's one that I think Mississippi State must win if they're really serious about being any kind of a contender in a very tough division. You know, almost everybody is looking at LSU and Alabama and Arkansas as the teams that will dominate. But funny things happen when you can get a little momentum and play these teams at home. And Mississippi State, if you go back and look, they've played LSU tough. They just haven't been able to win, but they've been in these games close. So if they can get a little confidence and get over the hump, then they might have a special season. I could see them winning 8, and if everything breaks right, I mean, they could win 9, 10 games maybe. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We'll know early. We'll know early if they can pull it off. Ole Miss is in total rebuild mode. What Hugh's got to go through with the injuries that he's had and player defections already in camp this year, it's going to be very tough for Ole Miss. Now, our game is with UTEP. Certainly a game in Oxford that's winnable. So that's a big one for them in week 2. But it looks like right now as we talk, it's going to be kind of a long year at Ole Miss. Our 3rd game is South Carolina with UAB in Columbia, the 3rd week of the season. And I am really intrigued by the SEC East race. I think everyone is sort of going toward Georgia, a few South Carolina, and then everybody else. But look at what we've got the first couple of weeks. You got South Carolina going to Vandy to open the season. Big upset potential in that game. Then you've got Georgia going to Missouri in week 2. That could be a potential upset. Florida going to Texas A&M
that same week
in week 2, and both of those games being the first SEC games for Mizzou and Texas A&M. And if those games go to the home team, I mean, that East race is up for grabs.
Totally. It's going to be a big year in the SEC again. I think everyone's counting on adding number 7 this year, and they got the talent to do it again.
And you know, November 3rd. That's the day. I mean, that's LSU and Alabama, and if it goes according to form, then that's the game that will decide it all one more time.
You cannot be a for-real NBA announcer in 2012-2013 without keeping score with your official NBA announcer nerd pen. We have a 4-color pen. The beautiful people at Vic make these available. I get mine at the supermarket in my neighborhood. First quarter blue, second quarter green, third quarter black, fourth quarter, it's go time, red for the 4th period. Now, if we go to overtime, we must improvise. But that's for another session here on FoxSportsSouth.com.